Are we on the cusp of the biggest monetary shock in 50 years? The biggest shock to the silver price and the gold price in decades? You be the judge. But we have new information coming out. And if this comes true, it could be big, big news for the gold price and the silver price. Imagine, if you will, gold breaking through its all-time high. And I believe once it gets through its all-time high, which it's been struggling with for a number of years, it will immediately rocket much higher, maybe to the $2,500, $2,600 range. We'll see silver north of $30, $35, lickety split. Agree with me or not, that's what I see coming down the pike. And if these predictions of the biggest monetary shock in 50 years are indeed true, that's exactly what we could likely see happen. We have some new information from Jim Rickards himself, a recently published article where he points out some fascinating information about what's going on in the world, specifically with the Brics nations and their major summit they're having this summer. August 22nd is the potential biggest day in the history of the world monetary system, possibly in the history for the silver and gold price as well, because the US dollar has been off the gold standard since 1971, floating in thin air, backed by essentially nothing. And if the Brics countries have their way, we could soon have a new world reserve currency that's actually backed by something real, something like gold. We're going to talk about that right now. Have you noticed that even our friends in the mainstream media are now talking about de-dollarization? The world has grown weary of a dollar-dominated system. That is not good news for the United States. And this dollar-dominated system has created a lot of problems for the United States. You ever sit back and just think about what's gone on in the last 20 or 30 years? All the conflicts that we seem to have gotten into, all the deployments of our military into foreign lands, it's become overbearing for the United States to enforce their power hegemony over the world and forcing the world to use the dollar. Now, the United States has also been accused of using the dollar as a weapon. In these Eastern countries, these Brics countries are vocal about the point that why would we want to hold U.S. dollars as a reserve currency when at a whim, if we do something that the United States doesn't like, it can just be confiscated. So we're heading into what Jim Rickards says is maybe one of the biggest monetary events, or the biggest monetary event in the last 50 years. And that is good news for precious metals. That is good news for the gold price and the silver price. It can be nothing but a positive, and it's really going to depend on how things unfold regarding how much of a positive it actually is. Now, I want to tell you a story. Imagine back to being 8 years old. Your daddy builds you a really cool seesaw. You and your friend get on it. But what your dad forgot to tell you was that he built the base, the fulcrum, the center of it, on a pit of quicksand. So you and your friend are having a grand old time on the seesaw, going up and down, smiling. Hey, everything's great. But everything is sinking. And finally, you sink into that pit of quicksand. That has everything to do with what's going on in the world monetary system. Because on one side, we have the Brics, who are talking about basing their currency on real assets, things like oil, things like gold, right? They're building their seesaw on a solid stone foundation, where in the West, because of gross financial mismanagement, our seesaw has been built on a bed of quicksand. And think of, instead of you and your friend on that seesaw, think of that being the US dollar and the euro, two currencies, right? Always comparing themselves. The dollar's strong, the dollar's weak, right? The seesaw goes up and down, but all the while, the seesaw is sinking into the quicksand. And that's what we're looking at as we come into the decades that are ahead of us, the years that are ahead of us. Everyone wants to focus on the dollar and how strong the dollar is. Well, they're comparing the dollar to the euro and to the yen. They aren't comparing the dollar to anything real. The dollar isn't based on gold anymore. We can thank our President Richard Nixon in 1971. He temporarily took us off the gold standard. Temporarily. But consider the fact that the Brics countries, that other 50% of the world population that controls more than 50% of the world's resources, that they're backing their new currency likely with gold. Also consider that China and Russia, right, two of the largest components, India, those countries love gold. China and Russia are two of the world's biggest gold producers, and they both, all three of those countries, hold massive reserves of gold. So it makes sense that they would be moving into that direction. Guys, we could be forced back onto a gold standard, especially if half or more than half of the world begins to use and utilize a currency that's actually backed by physical metal. And it gets even scarier for the United States when you consider that when Nixon took us off the gold standard, he basically moved us to a system, the petrodollar, where the dollar was backed by oil. Yes, all the oil in the world essentially was traded in U.S. dollars. In exchange, we provided Saudi Arabia with military and defense support, but that also is coming to an end. We know the Saudis are developing much closer relationships with the Chinese and with the Russians, leaving the dollar kind of sitting there in a very vulnerable situation. Now, this likely, guys, is not going to happen overnight. August 22nd, we aren't going to wake up and suddenly have gold at $3,000 or $5,000. But this is the trend. It's happening. And again, when the mainstream media is even talking about it, we know it's real. They're planting the seed in everyone's head that the dollar is in for some rough times. Again, I don't have a crystal ball. Don't make any financial decisions. Don't adopt a puppy. Get engaged. Don't do anything based upon the information I shared with you here today. I'm just giving my opinion. Don't forget, you have an opinion as well. It's important. Leave a comment in the comment section below. Most important, go watch a live stream, and I'll see you next time.